My name is Olivia Bennett. I'm 31 years old, and until the night my family tried to take my house, I believed there were limits to what parents would demand from one child to rescue another. I was wrong. "You have 10 minutes to sign," my mother said, pushing a transfer deed across my dining table. Beside her sat a woman wearing a real estate badge, a leather folder open in front of her, while my father stood near the doorway like a security guard. Through the kitchen window, I could see a rental truck backed into my driveway. Two men were unloading a sectional sofa into my garage. It belonged to my younger brother. No one had asked my permission. "He has two children," my mother continued. "You have empty bedrooms. This shouldn't even be a discussion." The realtor tapped the signature line with a silver pen. My father announced that the paperwork had already been prepared and that refusing would prove I cared more about property than family. Then my brother walked in carrying a box labeled Master Bedroom, as though I had already disappeared. I asked who had authorized the move. He smiled and said, "Mom told me you'd come around." When I reached for the deed, I noticed something beneath it, a refinancing worksheet showing a proposed loan against my house. The amount was $286,000. My home was nearly paid off. My family wasn't simply asking for shelter. Someone planned to turn my equity into cash. I placed the paper back on the table and said one word: "No." My mother slapped me. My father opened the front door and declared that I was no longer his daughter. I touched my burning cheek, looked at every person in the room, and smiled. Because none of them understood what I did for a living, or what I had already noticed in those documents. Before I tell you why I smiled, what the papers were hiding, and why they were calling me 112 times a day 2 weeks later, tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? I'd love to see how far Olivia's story travels. 2 weeks before that night, my life had finally reached a milestone I had worked toward for nearly a decade. I lived in Wichita, Kansas, where aviation was not just an industry, but part of the city's identity. I worked as an aviation safety compliance investigator for a private certification firm. When manufacturers prepared a new aircraft component for federal review, my team examined maintenance records, supplier histories, inspection reports, and chains of approval. My job was to find the detail everyone else had overlooked: the altered date, the copied signature, the supplier that existed only on paper. It wasn't glamorous, but it required discipline, patience, and an instinct for inconsistencies. That month, I had been promoted to Regional Investigations Manager after identifying falsified inspection records that could have placed hundreds of passengers at risk. My company planned a small celebration, and for once, I considered inviting my parents. Before I could call them, my mother started a family video chat. I answered from my office, expecting she had remembered my promotion. Instead, she immediately turned the camera toward my brother's children. Caleb had broken his tablet, Sophie needed braces, and their father had apparently lost another job. My mother never asked about my work. She said, "Your brother is under unbearable pressure. You wouldn't understand because you only have yourself to support." I stared at the framed promotion letter on my desk, while my father explained that parents deserved flexibility employers could not provide. My brother had been dismissed from a commercial flooring company after failing to show up for 3 consecutive Monday shifts. According to him, the supervisor had discriminated against fathers. According to a former co-worker who later contacted me, he had been gambling online during work hours and had borrowed money from 2 apprentices. This wasn't the first time my family had called his consequences an emergency. Over 6 years, I had paid $8,400 toward his overdue rent, covered a $3,200 transmission repair, purchased school supplies for both children, and watched them for an entire summer while he claimed to be completing a certification course. He quit after 3 classes. The previous year, I loaned him $42,000 from my savings after he promised to launch a legitimate home renovation company. He sent me a polished business plan, invoices for equipment, and a repayment schedule. I later learned that most of the equipment had been leased, the business address belonged to a mailbox store, and the money had vanished within 5 months. When I questioned him, my mother said I was humiliating a father who was trying to provide. My father advised me to treat the money as a gift. That was how my family worked. My brother's promises were treated as assets, while my actual labor was treated as an unlimited account. 3 days after my promotion, my mother called again and asked how many bedrooms were in my house. She knew the answer. She had attended the housewarming. Still, she asked whether I really used all 3 rooms. One was my bedroom, one was an office, and the third held equipment for the volunteer aviation education workshops I taught on weekends. She sighed and said children needed space more than projects did. I told her my home was not available. She changed the subject so quickly that I almost convinced myself the question had been harmless. Then I came home the following Friday and found a measuring tape stretched across my garage floor. A handwritten note had been taped to the wall. Sofa, 104 inches. Dining table, 82. Someone had entered my garage. I checked the electronic lock history. My father's emergency code had been used at 2:16 that afternoon. Would you still call it generosity when someone begins measuring your home before you have agreed to give it away? I deleted his code that night, installed 2 cameras, and called a property attorney named Rebecca Shaw. I told her I might be overreacting. She replied, "People who respect ownership don't secretly measure rooms." The confrontation did not happen at my parents' house. That was the first major difference between their plan and the truth they later told everyone. They invited themselves to my home under the excuse of discussing a temporary arrangement. My mother promised there would be no pressure. At 6 o'clock she arrived with my father, my brother Mason, his wife Brooke, the 2 children, and a realtor named Cheryl Vaughn. A rental truck followed them into the driveway. Before I could ask why, Mason opened the back and said they had brought only the essentials. My new camera recorded him directing 2 movers toward the garage. Brooke carried in framed family photographs and placed them on my entry table. "The kids need to feel like this is home," she said. Cheryl introduced herself as a family property specialist, although she avoided giving me a business card. She spread documents across my dining table: a quitclaim deed, an authorization for representation, a proposed occupancy agreement, and a refinancing estimate. My mother presented the plan as though everyone had voted. I would transfer the house to Mason for $1. He would assume responsibility for utilities. I could live temporarily in the basement apartment of a friend my parents knew. After he's stabilized, the family would discuss compensating me. There was no deadline, no repayment requirement, and no clause returning the property to me. When I asked why a temporary housing arrangement required permanent transfer of ownership, Cheryl answered too quickly. She said banks preferred clean title arrangements. Banks. That word confirmed this was never merely about giving the children bedrooms. I picked up the refinancing estimate. It proposed borrowing $286,000 after the deed transfer, despite the fact that Mason had no job, poor credit, and a failed business. The application listed projected income from Bennett Restoration Group. I recognized the company name from the $42,000 loan. The company had supposedly closed. "What is this money for?" I asked. Mason said it would consolidate debts and allow him to restart the business. Brooke added that a larger cash reserve would help them become independent. I laughed once because the logic was almost impressive. They planned to become independent by taking my house, extracting my equity, and leaving me with nothing. My father leaned over the table. "We have already discussed what is fair. You own a house because you had advantages Mason never had." I reminded him that I bought it with my salary, a 15-year mortgage, and no down payment assistance. Mason interrupted. "You don't have a family, Olivia. You have a career and a bunch of empty rooms." Caleb and Sophie were standing near the hallway listening. My mother placed one hand on my arm and softened her voice. "Sign it for the children. Don't make them watch their aunt choose walls over them." That sentence revealed the cruelty of the setup. They had brought two children to witness the confrontation so that any refusal could be portrayed as rejection. I crouched and told Caleb and Sophie that none of this was their fault and that adults were discussing paperwork. Mason pulled them away and accused me of confusing them. Then I noticed that one document already contained a signature resembling mine. It appeared on a preliminary lender authorization. The loops were close, but the final stroke was wrong. I spent my career examining records and approval trails. Someone had copied my signature from another document. "Who signed this?" I asked. The room went quiet. Cheryl reached for the page, but I placed my hand over it. My father said it was probably a sample. I asked why a sample had a date, witness initials, and my property's legal description. Mason's face changed. For the first time, he was not offended or desperate. He was frightened. My mother tried to push the quitclaim deed toward me and said the easiest solution was to sign the official version, making every earlier formality irrelevant. I told them to remove the furniture and leave. She slapped me hard enough to turn my head. Brooke gasped, but she did not move. My father pointed toward the front door of my own house and shouted that if I rejected my brother's children, I was rejecting the entire family. He publicly cut me out of his will, declared he would tell every relative what I had done, and demanded that I apologize to my mother. I smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because the forged page was lying beneath my hand, my cameras were recording, and Cheryl had just whispered to Mason, "You said she was willing." I folded the questionable authorization, sealed it inside a plastic document sleeve from my office, and called the police non-emergency line. That was when the realtor ran. The officers did not arrest anyone that evening. Property fraud is rarely resolved as dramatically as it is on television. They separated us, took statements, and instructed the movers to remove everything from my garage. My mother claimed the slap had been a reflex caused by emotional distress. My father claimed I had invited them to discuss the transfer. Mason insisted the signature was part of a draft prepared by Cheryl. Cheryl was gone before the first patrol car arrived, and the phone number she had provided went directly to voicemail. I gave the officers copies of my security footage and received an incident number. Once the driveway was empty, I locked every door and called Rebecca. She arrived 40 minutes later carrying a laptop, a portable scanner, and the calm expression of someone who had expected the situation to become worse. We reviewed each document. The forged lender authorization was not the only irregularity. The occupancy agreement referred to my address as Mason's primary residence, effective 3 weeks earlier. A contractor estimate listed $91,000 in renovations allegedly performed by Bennett Restoration Group. No such work had occurred. A property valuation form included photographs of my kitchen, garage, and upstairs bedrooms. Some had been taken during my housewarming 18 months earlier. Others appeared recent. My father had used the emergency code not only to measure the garage, but to photograph my home for a lending packet. Rebecca discovered that Cheryl's real estate license had expired 11 months earlier. She was not employed by the brokerage printed on the folder. The witness initials beside my forged signature matched Brooke's middle and last initials. The plan slowly came into focus. Mason owed money to gambling platforms, private lenders, former employees, and suppliers from his failed renovation company. My parents had already borrowed against their own house to help him. That money was gone. A lender had apparently offered a path forward if Mason could obtain title to a nearly paid-off property. My house was the last untouched asset within reach. They intended to transfer it for $1, claim Mason had operated his company from the address, inflate the property value through fabricated improvements, and extract enough cash to settle the loudest creditors. If the refinance failed, Rebecca explained, he would still own your house. That was the moment my anger became colder and more useful. I could have called every relative and defended myself. Instead, I said nothing publicly. I copied the video, preserved the original files, photographed the red mark on my face, and exported 6 months of messages. I found texts in which my mother referred to my home as the children's future house. My father had once asked me to email him a copy of my signature page from an insurance document, claiming he needed it to update the family emergency file. That image likely became the model for the forgery. Rebecca sent preservation notices to the lender, the former brokerage and the title processing company named in the documents. We filed a property fraud alert with the county recorder and placed an additional verification requirement on any deed involving my address. I contacted the State Real Estate Commission regarding Cheryl's conduct. Then, I used the investigative discipline I applied at work. I created a timeline with dates, messages, access records, document versions, and financial claims. Instead of writing "Mason lied," I wrote precisely what he claimed, when he claimed it, and what contradicted it. Facts are harder to manipulate than emotions. While reviewing the renovation estimate, I recognized 3 supplier names. Our company had once investigated counterfeit aircraft storage materials sold through shell vendors, and one supplier shared a registration address with Mason's defunct company. I did not access any private work database. I searched public business records and discovered that Bennett Restoration Group had been reinstated 4 months earlier without my knowledge. My home address was listed as its operating location. Mason had used my property to secure supplier credit and advertise renovation services. Several customers had paid deposits for projects that were never started. One elderly couple had filed a civil complaint. Another had posted photographs of a half-demolished kitchen. This was no longer just a family dispute. My house had become the false foundation of a business scheme. I asked myself a question that changed everything. How many times had I protected Mason from consequences and called it love? The answer was too many. That night, I instructed Rebecca to proceed with every lawful report available. I did not want revenge through humiliation or threats. I wanted documentation, accountability, and distance. The truth did not need me to scream. It needed me to stop hiding it. The first 48 hours were quiet. My parents believed silence meant I was reconsidering. My mother sent a message saying the deed could still be signed privately if I was embarrassed by my outburst. Mason wrote that the children had cried all night because they thought I did not love them. Brooke sent a photograph of Caleb sleeping beside a packed suitcase. I did not respond. Rebecca advised me to keep one written channel open and block calls temporarily. I sent a single message. Do not enter my property, use my address, represent that you own or occupy my home, or contact me except through my attorney regarding the disputed documents. Mason called 7 times within 10 minutes. Then came the voice message that changed from pleading to threatening halfway through. He said he was in a dark place, that everyone would blame me if something happened to him, and that I had 48 hours to fix this. I took the statement seriously without surrendering to it. I contacted local emergency services and requested a welfare check. Officers found him safe at my parents' house, watching basketball. Afterward, he left me an enraged message accusing me of trying to have him committed. Manipulators often expect threats to produce obedience. When concern produces accountability instead, they become furious. The following day, my parents arrived with Caleb and Sophie. They remained on the sidewalk because the new gate code would not work. My mother instructed the children to ring the bell and ask why their aunt had made them homeless. I spoke through the camera. I told the children I loved them, but they could not come inside without arrangements made by responsible adults. My father began shouting that I was recording minors. I replied that the exterior security system had been installed before their arrival and asked them to leave. The footage later became evidence of continued harassment. I hated seeing the confusion on the children's faces. Setting a boundary did not make me feel powerful in that moment. It made me feel sick. But opening the door would have taught everyone that using children as leverage worked. 2 days later, the first legal consequence arrived. The State Real Estate Commission contacted Cheryl about acting with an expired license and participating in a transfer involving a disputed signature. The brokerage whose name she had used sent a cease and desist notice. Cheryl immediately hired an attorney and began distancing herself from my family. Through counsel, she claimed Mason and my father had assured her that I had verbally agreed to the transfer. She also produced text messages discussing an anticipated commission after the refinance. One message from Mason read, "Once she signs, the equity solves everything." Another from my father said, "She may resist, but Diane can handle her." Cheryl's records included a document request Mason had sent weeks earlier. My legal name, birth date, property tax number, and a sample signature. My father had provided the insurance page. When Rebecca forwarded those messages to the detective assigned to the complaint, my family's tone changed immediately. Mason stopped demanding the house and began begging me to withdraw my statement. My mother said an investigation would destroy the children's future. My father warned that legal action could kill him because of his blood pressure. Brooke said she had only initialed what Mason placed in front of her and did not understand the document. By the end of the week, 4 creditors had contacted Mason after learning that his company address was disputed. 2 customers filed additional complaints. A supplier suspended his account. The private lender reviewing the refinance froze the application and reported the suspected falsification to its fraud department. The calls became constant. My phone logged 28 attempts Monday, 53 Tuesday, and 84 Wednesday. On Thursday, between my parents, Mason, Brooke, unknown numbers and relatives recruited to pressure me. There were 112 calls. I did not answer. I exported the log and sent it to Rebecca. Then I blocked every number except my attorney, the detective, and 1 emergency contact for the children. That evening, I received an email from Mason with the subject line, "You're winning." The body contained 1 sentence. "Is this what you wanted?" I stared at it for a long time before replying through counsel. "I wanted you to stop using my identity and property. Everything after that is the result of your choices." Mason's final attempt to regain control happened 12 days after the dinner. He arrived at my house shortly after 7 in the morning, before sunrise, carrying a crowbar and an envelope. My camera alerted me before he reached the porch. He looked exhausted, unshaven, and furious. Brooke had taken the children to her sister's home after discovering that he had hidden more than $170,000 in debts, including loans taken in both of their names. My parents had received a default notice connected to a home equity loan they had guaranteed for his company. Cheryl's attorney had turned over the text messages. Mason's version of events was collapsing, and he had decided that the original forged document was somehow inside my house. He banged on the door and demanded that I give him the packet. I told him through the speaker to leave. He raised the crowbar and struck the wooden porch railing. "You ruined my life!" he shouted. "You could have signed 1 piece of paper, and none of this would be happening." 3 neighbors came outside. One began recording. Mason noticed them and changed tactics. He dropped the crowbar, sank onto the steps, and announced loudly that his wealthy sister was evicting 2 children because she hated families. I opened the interior door but kept the locked storm door between us. "You were never my tenant," I said. "You never lived here. You forged documents to obtain my property." He rushed the storm door and pulled the handle hard enough to shake the frame. That was when I called 911. As we waited, he began confessing in fragments without realizing it. He said the refinance would have paid everyone. He said Dad had agreed that I did not need the equity. He said Mom promised I would eventually forgive them. He said the signature was close enough, because I was going to sign anyway. My cameras captured every word. Police arrived within minutes and ordered him away from the entrance. Mason tried to leave, but one officer stopped him near the driveway. They found the crowbar and the envelope. Inside were photocopies of the forged authorization, a handwritten list of creditor amounts, and a proposed division of the refinancing proceeds. Cheryl was allocated $11,500. My parents were to receive $64,000 to repay part of the loan against their house. Mason would keep the remaining funds after settling selected debts. The children's housing represented only one line in the budget: $9,600 for 12 months of rent. They had never intended to live in my home permanently. They planned to use it as collateral, rent another property, and leave the debt attached to what had once been mine. Mason was arrested for attempted unlawful entry, property damage, and violation of the written no trespass notice. The suspected forgery and fraud remained under separate investigation. My neighbors stood across the street as he was placed in the patrol car. I did not feel triumphant. I felt clear. Public consequences were not something I had arranged. They were what happened when private misconduct finally reached a locked door. The fallout accelerated. Bennett Restoration Group lost its supplier accounts, and 3 clients obtained judgments for deposits and unfinished work. Because Mason had used misleading financial statements, the business entered involuntary bankruptcy proceedings. Brooke filed for legal separation and sought temporary control of the family finances. She gave investigators access to a laptop containing draft loan applications and messages in which Mason referred to me as the clean asset. My mother called Brooke disloyal. Brooke replied that protecting her children meant stopping their father from committing another crime in their names. My father's situation deteriorated next. He had signed a personal guarantee for $138,000 in business debt and borrowed against the house he and my mother had owned for 27 years. With Mason unable to pay and their retirement savings depleted, the lender began foreclosure proceedings. My parents blamed me publicly until Rebecca sent a factual summary to the relatives they had contacted. It included dates, loan amounts, the false company address, and excerpts from the refinance plan. I did not post it online. I did not contact their church, employers, or neighbors. I simply corrected the people they had recruited to shame me. Most stopped calling. 2 apologized. One aunt admitted my mother had told everyone I owned 4 houses and had refused to lend Mason one. I owned 1 house. That lie explained how easily relatives had accepted the story. At a preliminary hearing, the judge granted me a protective order prohibiting Mason from approaching my home or contacting me directly. He looked at me across the courtroom and whispered, "You chose strangers over blood." I answered quietly, "No, I chose the truth over permission." For the first time in my life, no one interrupted me. 6 months later, my house was still mine. The railing Mason damaged had been repaired. The garage had been converted into a workshop for my aviation education program, and the extra bedroom was no longer described as empty. It held flight simulators, donated aircraft components, and 6 workstations used by high school students learning the basics of safety engineering. One of those students later told me she had never considered an aviation career until she attended the program. That mattered more to me than proving to my family that I deserved the space. Property has value beyond the number of people sleeping inside it. A home can protect work, privacy, education, recovery, and peace. Mason eventually accepted a plea agreement covering the unlawful entry incident and 1 count connected to submitting a false authorization. He received probation, mandatory financial counseling, community service, and a restitution order tied to the property damage. The broader business debts were handled through bankruptcy and civil judgments. He did not go to prison, but he lost the illusion that another relative would erase every consequence. Brooke finalized the separation and moved with Caleb and Sophie into a modest rental near her sister. She found administrative work at a medical clinic and established a supervised schedule for Mason to see the children. I maintained contact with them through Brooke, never discussing the investigation in front of them. Children should not be punished for the actions adults committed while claiming to act in their name. Cheryl agreed to cooperate with investigators. Her expired license was formally revoked, and she was prohibited from reapplying for several years. My father sold 2 vehicles and withdrew the remainder of his retirement account, but it was not enough to save my parents' house. They moved into a small apartment outside the city. My mother called that outcome my revenge. It was not. I never signed their loan, controlled their spending, or asked them to mortgage their home for Mason's business. Their loss was the bill for years of favoritism disguised as compassion. They had repeatedly protected him from discomfort until the protection became participation. My father sent me a letter after the move. He did not apologize at first. He explained how humiliating it was to lose the house, how difficult the stairs were for my mother, and how much the family had suffered. On the 4th page, he finally wrote, "I should not have given him your signature page." That sentence was the first honest admission I had received. My mother's letter arrived a week later. She apologized for the slap, but still insisted that fear for the children had clouded her judgment. I replied once. I said fear did not create the forged paperwork, the secret photographs, the false business address, or the refinancing plan. Those required preparation. I established 3 conditions for any future relationship. All contact had to remain in writing for 1 year. Neither parent could ask me for money or intervene in Mason's legal matters, and they had to attend counseling focused on family favoritism and financial enabling. My father agreed. My mother accused me of treating family like a corporate investigation. I answered that clear terms were necessary because vague promises had always been used against me. For nearly 4 months, she refused. Then she began counseling without announcing it. Her messages slowly changed. Instead of telling me what Mason needed, she asked how my students were doing. Instead of saying I had destroyed the family, she wrote that she was beginning to understand how often they had assigned me responsibility without giving me consideration. I did not rush to forgive her. Remorse is not proven by a dramatic conversation. It is proven by changed behavior repeated over time. Mason wrote several letters from court-ordered counseling. The first blamed our parents, the second blamed gambling, the third blamed pressure. I returned each one unanswered. His 4th letter contained no request, accusation, or explanation. It said, "I treated your life as a resource because everyone taught me you would recover from whatever we took. I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway." I kept that letter, but I did not reopen direct contact. Accountability can be acknowledged without restoring access. That was the lesson my family never expected me to learn. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same decision. Forgiveness may release anger inside you. Reconciliation gives another person a place in your life, and that place must be earned through safety, honesty, and consistency. Being independent does not mean your possessions are less important. Being single does not make your home communal property. Having children does not grant someone moral ownership over the labor of a sibling who does not. Parents who continually rescue one child by sacrificing another do not preserve family unity. They teach entitlement to the favored child and emotional abandonment to the responsible one. Eventually, both children pay a price. One grows up believing consequences are negotiable. The other grows up believing love must be purchased through surrender. I had lived inside that second lesson for 31 years. Refusing the deed was the moment I stopped. People sometimes ask whether I regret reporting my brother. I regret that he made reporting necessary. I regret that my parents confused enabling with devotion. I regret that Caleb and Sophie witnessed adults behaving as though manipulation was normal. But I do not regret protecting my identity, my home, or the future I built. Boundaries are not punishments designed to control other people. They are rules governing what you will permit around your own life. The person who becomes angry at a reasonable boundary is often the person who benefited most from its absence. A year after the night of the slap, I stood in my garage workshop while 12 students presented safety designs to local engineers. My mother attended through a video link. She did not ask to speak, redirect the attention, or mention Mason. At the end, she sent one message. Now I understand that those rooms were never empty. I read it twice and placed my phone back in my pocket. It was not a perfect ending. My parents had not become different people overnight. Mason had not recovered everything he lost. I had not forgotten the sound of furniture being moved into my garage while strangers waited for me to surrender my home. But revenge was never the house, the arrest, or the foreclosure. My victory was that their emergencies no longer controlled my decisions. I had stopped proving my value to people committed to discounting it. I had stopped confusing guilt with responsibility. Most importantly, I learned that saying no does not destroy a healthy family. It only exposes the relationships that depended on your inability to say it. So let me ask you this. If your family called your boundaries selfish only because those boundaries stopped benefiting them, would you still feel obligated to open the door? Or would you finally lock it, protect what you built, and let them face the consequences waiting on the other side?
Thank you for watching this story with us today. Everything here is fictional and made only for educational entertainment and dramatic storytelling. We hope to remind you that when someone tries to make you doubt your memory, your feelings, and your worth, stepping away can help you hear your own truth again. Sometimes distance brings back the clarity that manipulation tried to take.